So I'm Mokhtari, and I'm an MD-PhD student working jointly in Dan's lab and in Pauly Fordyce's lab. And I'm actually going to be tag teaming this talk with Markin, who's a postdoc in both labs. And this work revolves around recent developments that Craig, myself, and Danny Sunday, a great research associate, also working jointly, have been working on over the last approximately 2 years. And our work revolves around developing and validating new technology to increase the throughput and quantitativeness of enzymology for the 21st century. And I don't think I need to tell this crowd why enzymes are so important and why we need to study them. They're important to our daily lives, whether in household products, like cleaning agents, or to clean up our messes. So bioremediation, there are new enzyme systems being developed specifically to clean up oil spills, for example. And of course, also for green chemistry, enzymes are the perfect catalyst. They have aqueous solvents, and they have high substrate specificity and product selectivity. And they're very good at atom economy. And of course, enzymes are also central to pharmaceuticals. They're the targets of many small molecules, which still play an important part despite the rise of biologics. And one thing I would say is that we still are not harnessing enzymes to their full potential, despite their utility today in all kinds of applications. And one reason for that is that we simply can't engineer enzymes to be as good as the very best that nature has to offer, despite our best efforts. We have gaps in our understanding and knowledge. And the other reason we need to get better at understanding how variation in enzymes is going to affect their function is because the number of variants we're seeing in the human genome is increasing at a much higher rate than the number of variants that are being associated with disease. So there's this urgent need to start making functional predictions about enzymes and protein systems, even if we can't characterize every single variation. And I would assert that there are two reasons why understanding and engineering enzymes remains very complex. One reason is that enzyme function is highly context dependent, and also residues throughout the whole scaffold matter for both stability and catalysis. And the best tools we've had at our disposal so far to dissect the roles of residues in enzyme function have been those of traditional biochemistry. So quantitative kinetic assays, quantitative inhibition assays using transition state and ground state analogs, and of course structural characterization with crystallography and other techniques. And I think great work out of the Herschlag lab that really highlights this has been that of Fanny and others, including Ariana, who recently graduated. And Fanny and Ariana made many ablative mutations to the active site of the world's most interesting enzyme, alkaline phosphatase. And they quantitated thermodynamic coupling between 5 active site residues. And they were able to dissect this active site to delineate 3 thermodynamic functional units. And I don't want to focus on the mechanistic detail here, except to point out that Fanny made over 50 constructs, and this work took more than 2 years. And she is one of the most efficient scientists I've ever met in my life. And so this was a tremendous tour de force and testament to her work ethic. But it does point out the fact that despite being able to dissect the connectivity of the active site residues for a system like E. coli alkaline phosphatase, there exists many nearest neighboring residues, and then residues outside of those forming second, third, etc. shells. And indeed, residues distal from the active site still matter for catalysis. You have allosteric communication pathways and mutational hotspots that people observe all the time when they're screening enzyme variants. And while it is indeed the case that we're never going to be able to probe all of enzyme or protein sequence space, or even touch it, we need to push the frontier of what we can do traditionally at the same level of quantitativeness in that direction. We need to start getting out to measuring variants at the scale of an entire enzyme and more to start generating generalizable principles and models with which we can really start to make predictions and understand and engineer enzymes. And why is that difficult today? Well, as you guys are probably well aware, expressing and purifying enzymes is extremely time-consuming and labor-intensive. To transform, grow, express, purify, and assay takes about a week. And say you're efficient and you do this for 5 enzyme variants. That's great, but if you wanted to extend that to the scale of the whole enzyme, say 500 residues in length, that would cost, very conservatively, $500,000 and 3 years of time, and would cost the sanity of 2 people. So yes, there are higher throughput techniques and fantastic techniques that have been recently developed, one of which was just awarded a Nobel Prize, that allow us to make orders of magnitude greater numbers of measurements for enzyme variants. However, at the cost of quantitativeness and the ability to make quantitative measurements of kcat, km, and inhibition constants. And those are the types of measurements one needs to construct thermodynamic Newton cycles and develop more sophisticated models for enzyme function. And there in the gaps lie opportunities to use next generations of technologies, one of which I'll be discussing today with Craig, to make 2 orders of magnitude larger numbers of quantitative measurements and at 2 orders of magnitude less time than is currently achievable. And this additional technology that Florian alluded to is another technology being developed with great work by Carl Brauer in the 4X lab, and is something that the Herschlag lab is also working towards as well. And so with this new technology called HTMEC, we're able to make quantitative measurements for 500 enzyme Newton variants in 2 days at 1/100th the time and 1/100th the cost currently achievable. And so this technology is very vague at this point. I haven't told you anything about it or how it works, except for the fact that it's microfluidic based. And therein lies the key to its success. And Pauly Fordyce in her postdoctorate work developed and expanded the Mitomi microfluidic device, which I'll get into a bit later. But this technology first relies on generating a library of plasmids containing variants of interest, say an entire enzyme Newton scan of the alien scan, for example, just arbitrarily. And to that, we align our Mitomi microfluidic device. So we have our enzyme library that we print onto a glass slide using a microarray printer. And atop that print, we align a microfluidic device, which may get passed around. But feel free to come up afterwards and take a look at it. It has thousands of microscopically relieved features that constitute microchambers that we can align on top of our plasmids and use to constrict fluid so that we can express and purify enzymes thousands at a time and then assay them quantitatively. And in detail, those chambers look like this, where we're able to spatially isolate a plasmid of interest, and then adjacent to it is a microreactor, a little reaction chamber. And in those chambers, we can perform reactions. So more details about how that actually gets performed. First, we align our device, and then we can introduce in vitro transcription and translation mixture that solubilizes our plasmid, and we can perform expression in situ. And then we can pull down our enzymes that are expressed isogenically in each chamber to a specific location in the device. And then we can flow everything out to purify, and we can quantify because our enzyme is a fusion construct with GFP. And simply to assay, we introduce fluorogenic substrate that, when cleaved, is quantified using fluorescence microscopy. And we can quantify that buildup in fluorescence over time to make quantitative buildup curves that we can fit to initial rates. And we can iterate for substrate concentrations using the same device over and over again to generate quantitative Michaelis-Menten curves and inhibition curves that we can fit kcat and km to. And we can do this for hundreds and thousands of enzyme variants all at the same time in the order of a couple of days. And I haven't yet introduced our development system, because every great assay needs a great development system. And potentially the world's second most interesting enzyme is another AP variant actually, called CAFE. And CAFE is a close relative of E. coli alkaline phosphatase, except for the fact that it lacks a third metal site and it has a bimetallozinc site. And this active site works by first catalyzing nucleophilic displacement of an alkoxide to generate a phosphothreonine intermediate, and then that intermediate is attacked by hydroxide to release organic phosphate and generate the enzyme. And Fanny Sundgren and others in the lab have quantitatively characterized effective ablation of each of these active site residues using cognate and non-cognate substrates. And it's these quantitative measurements that serve as a great validation test set with which we can develop this technology and benchmark it. And that's what Craig Markin will now be discussing.
pay attention. Speak fast. So yeah, as Daniel said, the first thing we wanted to do when developing this technology was actually make sure it works. So what we did was we took 50 replicates of the 6 mutants that Fanny had previously measured, drew them all across the chip that's going around now, and then compared the on-chip values for all these mutants and the catalytically inactive nucleophile deletion mutants to the off-chip values. And to reiterate Daniel's point, the real power of this technology is that we're getting kcat and cam, which together give you the important parameter, kcat over cam. And you're reproducing the off-chip values really well and across about 4 to 5 orders of magnitude dynamic range. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we did was 526 mutations, which conveniently corresponds to the length of the enzyme, and we made valine and glycine mutations at each position. And the reason we did this sort of unbiased full scan of the enzyme is because, as Daniel showed you in the movie, if you look at the crystal structure, it's just like this thicket of hydrogen bond hydrophobic interactions. And just by looking at it, you don't know the underlying energetics. You don't know which ones are important or how important they are. So we wanted to do a sort of unbiased screen and figure that out. And so the real power of the technology, as I said, is measuring multiple kinetic parameters, kcat, cam, kcat over cam. But we can also do multiple substrates. We can do inhibition assays, and we can vary conditions. So in many ways, we can do all of the traditional assays of biochemistry, but at a very high throughput manner. So just to show you what the data looks like, so this is the substrate we use most, CMUP, and here are 2 representative mutants. We've got R26V and Y112V. The gray curves are the wild-type replicates from all these experiments, and you can see in CMUP that R266V doesn't seem to have any effect, whereas the Y1112V mutation is about 5-fold down in kcat over cam. So this sort of brings us to a point where I want to shout out Brian, because sort of seminal AP paper really hammered home the point that actually, because AP and PAFA are such good enzymes, that this substrate is diffusion limited for many mutants. And wild type. So we use a much intrinsically less reactive alkyl phosphate, methyl phosphate, via a coupled assay on the chip, and using this slower substrate, we can actually show that R26V has an effect of about 5-fold compared to the wild type, which we can only resolve using the slower substrate and not the aryl phosphate. So, and as Florian was talking about this morning, we're also really, really interested in how promiscuous activities of these enzymes change over the mutational landscape. So to address that, we synthesize this methyl diester. So this reacts much more slowly than the monoester substrate, but still appreciably, and you can see the R266V mutation actually makes it a better diesterase and lowers its monoesterase activity, so making it more of a generalist, whereas the Y112V mutation is down in both. So as I pointed out, we can also do inhibition assays. We have a ground state analog phosphate, and kill representative mutations of a tight phosphate inhibition. And we can also do the transition state analogs, vanadate and tungstate, all on the chip. So the first thing I'll show you is the valine scan effects on the cognate kcat over cam of the cognate reaction of CMUP. So all in red here are all 514. I've omitted a few because we didn't measure them in some of their active site mutants. And so we can see that there are 120 mutations significantly down in CMUP activity. If we map these on the 3-dimensional structure, we see things that we largely expect. So around the active site here are the most deleterious mutations in blue. It'll come around again. So you can see the 3 here and the 2 zinc, so we've got a lot of blue around there. But we also see effects of more moderate magnitude all over the enzyme. And it's unclear how residues up here are communicating with the active site. So it brings us to the question, so now we know we have all these effects, but what we'd really like to do is figure out which active site residues those more distal mutations are sort of talking to or communicating with. So the question is, how do we map this functional connectivity between distal residues and the active site? So to do that, we take the Herschlag approach, and it's to make many more quantitative measurements. And this is where I'd like to introduce my favorite oft-heard Dan quote, which is get to work. So we did. And so the first thing I'll tell you is some interesting effects we see when we compare the monoester substrate with the diester substrate. So Fanny's work showed that in PAF-A, these 2 residues, R164 and K162, contribute a great amount to specificity. So if you remove them and measure the rate of the cognate reaction goes down dramatically. if you remove them and measure the activity of the non-cognate reaction, there's almost no change. So there's almost no effect of these on the non-cognate activity. So these two residues map here to what we've sort of leadingly termed the specificity helix. So now if we take Fanny's results and we compare the methyl CMUP K-catalytic to the CMUP K-catalytic for K162A and R164A, we see no effect on the diester reaction, but we see great effects on the cognate reaction. So if we're looking at distal residues and we can measure these two substrates for all those residues as well, we expect to see a cluster of residues up here, which are presumably those that are interacting with K162 and R164, and then a whole bunch of other residues that are affecting both activities. And indeed, that's exactly what we see. So all of these residues here are not affected when we mutate them. They don't affect the diester activity, but they affect the monoester activity dramatically. And if we map those on the structure, we see they cluster right around the specificity helix, sort of as expected. And how much time do I have? Am I done?
You're done.
Okay. So we can also, wait, one more minute. We can also do, let's take time to walk over here and stop me. So we can also do the phosphate inhibition, some stuff from Logan Andrews, which is awesome. And we also see a cluster here around this nucleophile helix. So phosphate inhibition can be taken as a readout for nucleophile positioning. We can talk about that later in dinner. Most interesting dinner conversation ever. And they cluster around the nucleophile, the helix bearing the nucleophile, also as expected. Although we see this interesting little sector up here, we have no idea what's going on. It's really cool. So, conclusions and future directions. We can rapidly and quantitatively assay 1,000 enzymes in about 3 days, apart from the 3 years it took to develop it, if you don't count that. We get the same accuracy as traditional measurements. It's super easy to iterate through substrates, inhibitors, and conditions, and we're learning a lot of things, but it sort of tells us there's still lots to learn. And future directions, also lots of stuff. But I'm going to pause here, and instead of going through this, I'm going to talk about sort of what I've learned about Dan from doing this project. And I guess I get a couple minutes for that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess it's sort of, I was thinking like, everyone here knows Dan's an amazing scientist and a great mentor, but I was thinking like doing the project has sort of revealed to me that the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. So it's your guys' papers that have really laid such a solid foundation for the stuff we're doing. So we don't ever have to go back, really. Nothing ever comes out wrong. Everything in those papers is exactly that. It's done so well that we can just continuously build off it. And I think that's something that's actually a real rarity in science and something to be really, really proud of. And personally, Dan always pushes you. So Daniel and I actually synthesized these two substrates. And I think previously, I would have been like, oh, can we just like pay someone to synthesize this, or just buy it, or do something, or maybe work around it with some hacks. But Dan was like, no, you guys go out and you synthesize it, it'll be fine, you guys will be able to do it, it'll be really easy. It wasn't really easy, but it was fun. And I think that's one of the things that's really going to stick with me from this lab, is just that willingness and encouragement to like push beyond your comfort zone to just get things done and get things done properly. So thank you, Dan.
Any questions? Yeah.
So do you measure the purified enzyme concentration somehow on the chip?
We do, yes. We can construct a standard curve. So we can throw in like 5 nanomolar of GFP, and we can recruit all 5 nanomolar to the pull-down location, which we turn the button. And then we can iterate that 5 nanomolar again and again, and then we can make a titration curve. So then for a particular setup, we can relate fluorescence intensity to actual concentration.
What does H2max stand for?
High throughput, hydrofluidic enzyme kinetics.
Are you able, this might be blasphemous, but are there any sort of signals in like protein sequences of revolution that would explain some of your data?
That is one of the things, one of the things we're working on, and we're actually collaborating with Kim Reynolds at UT Southwestern to sort of use SCA or SCA, statistical coupling analysis, to get at these questions. Florian?
How do you pick the mutants that you study? And how about using, for example, phylogeny as a guide, because you still can't comprehensively cover everything. Would you use phylogeny or not? And then the second thing is that the detrimental effects can be relatively trivial due to stability. Can you assess that in a denaturation curve or something like that?
So
and then the third question
you
is,
do
do you really want to look at double mutants and then automate double mutant cycles, because that'd be much more
Yes.
meaningful?
That's one of the immediate next steps. So the methyl diester and the inhibition, they kind of point out, they suggest sectors, but to actually map the cooperativity and the connectivity, we want to go into those sectors and do mutant cycle analysis. And yeah, the dynamic range is good enough that we think we can do them all in the chip, which is going to be really cool. As for the first questions, let me move to Daniel.
Yeah, so stability-wise, pathways are very stable enzymes, so there's some assumption based on measurements maybe in traditional methods that single point mutants are not going to destabilize this significantly. In terms of actually directly measuring stability, that's an orthogonal assay being developed with the same platform that Fanny Sundin and others are in the lab and Polly's lab are working on, using a pulse proteolysis-based technique that's been adapted for this platform, so we can measure those directly too.
And I wonder if it's, you've done the screen with valine and with glycine, if I remember right.
Yeah.
But you've only talked about the valine stuff.
Mhm.
I wonder if there's any differences.
There are tons. I wanted to show it, but time.
I didn't allow him to.
So actually, there are more differences than there are similarities, just for the data. And it's so the hydrophobic core, right by the beta sheet, you remember such weird. But all the hydrophobic residues, they don't show up when you do the valine scan. When you do the glycine scan, a whole bunch of them show up. So we're making like leucine isoleucine to valine. Doesn't pick up the importance of having a hydrophobe there. Make glycine suddenly that mutant's way down. So it points to the importance and necessity of doing multiple substitutions in protein structures. Yes, and they're also in a similar, they cluster together. So if you map valine and glycine effects, they're different residues, but same sectors. So same regions that matter.
Okay, so let's finish tomorrow.